Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you for all coming out and braving the snow. If you were like me, you might have gotten a surprise finding that you needed to find the scraper for the ice off of your windshield. But you're all here and you're very welcome. I wanted to thank our two speakers today who are here to talk about spirituality and religion on college campuses. We have Emily Kopka, who is an alum of the Family School, by the way. I think she said 2011 today is when you graduated. So thank you. She is now the Director of Student Engagement at Metro Chicago Hillel. So we're looking forward to her perspective. And we also have Father Michael Rossman. He's a Jesuit chaplain in campus ministry at Loyola University. He's also an adjunct professor, so he has a lot of insight into what college students are thinking these days. So Emily, I wanted to start with you, especially as a Family School alum. I think this audience is very interested in hearing your perspective as someone who's coming from two faiths and you enter a college campus. How are you navigating sort of religion and spirituality on campus?
Hello. Thank you. So I went for my undergraduate degree, I went to University of Illinois in Champaign. And I feel like my religious and cultural, spiritual identity really ebbed and flowed kind of throughout my whole life. Growing up, I would identify as, we used to say cashew. I don't know if it was that was maybe a mix of Catholic, Christian, Jewish, and it was kind of a more of a silly thing. And then as I got older, I would say both. And then as I got a little bit older and I had a bat mitzvah, I went on an 8th grade trip to Israel, that I started to more identify as just Jewish. But it was always Jewish and from an interfaith family, not but. That was a really important thing, is it wasn't, oh, well, I'm Jewish, but from an interfaith family. It was always it was a part of it, and it was the two things together really was part of it. So in high school, I got really involved in BBYO, a youth group, and then when I got to college, I joined. I kind of started out a little stepping stone. I joined a Jewish sorority. I was in AE Phi, but I kind of felt out of the loop when it came to Jewish life, Jewish experience. There were so many people who had gone to day school or went to Hebrew school for more than just preparing for their bat mitzvahs, or they went to camp every year, and they all knew each other. So sometimes it didn't feel like it was enough. And then I started to get involved in Hillel a little bit my freshman year, but it took a little bit. I was still trying to figure out myself and what I wanted to do. And I think eventually when I had got connected to Hillel, one of the things that had really stood out to me, from especially having come from the Family School experience, was as I got more involved and connected, I realized that there's not just one way to be involved or be connected. It's just because I didn't have the same background as everyone else, which none of them all have the same backgrounds as each other either, which sometimes you don't always realize from the outside. But especially having come from somewhere where the differences in experience and backgrounds was actually something celebrated, not something that you are shying away from. That is really what led me to get involved in Hillel, just because I really wanted to find a place where I could figure out what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be and what I wanted to learn, and not have it just told to me, like, this is what you do, this is how you do it. And I'm really thankful for my Family School experience, that it set the bar really high to have the experience here of being able to really dive into learning, but in more of a fun, community-based kind of way, not just sitting at a desk and being told, here's how to do things. So that is when I was kind of figuring it all out. That is what eventually led me to get involved in Hillel when I was a student, and that is then kind of became the centerfold of my Jewish life.
You said something, Emily, if I can interrupt you for a second. You said something I thought was really interesting. You said that you sort of discovered on your journey on campus that there wasn't just one way to be involved and connected. And I think that's really central to what you probably learned here at Family School, which is that you can do both. The other thing I thought that was really interesting is you said it's never a but, it's an and, right? Which I think speaks volumes to sort of the openness. And even though you sort of landed in Judaism, can you explain just sort of the journey and the openness that you still have for both faiths?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because something that I think about is, for me, interfaith was just the norm. I thought that everyone celebrated Hanukkah with all of their Catholic friends all together, and that on Christmas everyone had their Jewish friends over to have a big family meal. And I think it was kind of nice to be in that bubble for a little bit before, and then as I got older, I would face some kind of scrutiny from other people in the Jewish community who would say, well, your mom's not Jewish, so you're not Jewish, and completely writing off my family and my history and everything. And that was never something that made sense to me, because I don't understand that, we're just going to go by the rules because those are the rules, where it always felt so much important to go off of your own history and your own family and your own beliefs. So I think that was it. It is both helpful to kind of be in that, I don't want to say bubble, but bubble where you can kind of have this shared community and shared background, because then you know that it's there. But it can be hard then when you go out into the rest of the world and people actually are not always as accepting. So I think that is something I really took with me to school. And you mentioned that there's not one right way. You might have to try out some different places, but they'll find, and whether it's, deciding to be more actively involved in Jewish life or Catholic life or anything, there's something out there. There's not only one option, and you gotta, students deserve to find what makes the most sense for them and what means the most for them.
Father Rossman, I see you nodding your head vigorously there. Would you like to join in there?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, my background would be different. I grew up perhaps in a more strictly Catholic bubble. I'm from Iowa, where there was not a huge Jewish population. And then I went to the University of Notre Dame, which is quite a Catholic environment. And then immediately after graduation, I joined the Jesuits. So I've been in a pretty Catholic world for most of my life, though I've lived in many different places and certainly have encountered people of all stripes and backgrounds and so forth. But certainly, I mean, I resonate with, even if my own particular journey is somewhat different, a navigation of various parts of my identity and a navigation of communities in which I belong.
I know you teach a required course, Intro to Theology.
Yes.
And you see all kinds of students. Before we met, you were talking to me about sort of, and again, this is anecdotal, I'm not asking for hard numbers from you, but you were sort of talking about the makeup of people who would identify as following a religion, practicing a religion. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, so I'm teaching Theo 100 at Loyola University Chicago. So all Loyola students are required to take 2 theology courses, and for their first course, Tier 1, they only have 2 options: Intro to Religious Studies or Intro to Christian Theology, the one that I take. So I teach a bunch of students who are in that classroom, not because they really want to be there, but largely because they have to be there. Hopefully, though, by this point in the semester, they are a little happier to be there and more engaged and so forth. So it has been interesting all semester. On the very first day of class, in kind of the last 10 minutes of that class, I gave them a piece of paper, and I first asked them some personal questions, and I said, of course, if you feel comfortable answering. But it was quite interesting. All of them were comfortable answering. And I asked them how would they identify in terms of their religion or spirituality or, none of the above. And it was really about split into thirds. 1/3 said they were non-religious. That could be atheist or agnostic or simply not religious. I'd say about 1/3 were Catholic or other Christian, and they would go to church at least with some regularity. And then I'd say roughly 1/3 would be Catholic or Christian, but they don't go to church much. They don't practice much. That at least was at the beginning of the semester. It's been quite interesting because at least some of those students who said they did not go to church, they've been going not just on Sundays, but even on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. We had this special mass for students.
I'm going to interrupt you just
Yeah.
1 second because you said that mass attendance is up significantly this year. I wonder
Yeah.
why you think that.
Yes, it is up significantly this year, and I've heard anecdotes from other campuses that paint a similar picture. And people have all sorts of different theories as to why this is. And of course, each person has his or her particular journey. You know, some would say, okay, I'm attracted to the beauty, or okay, I've lived in this world where so much is changing and I want some stability. You know, I want something solid. You know, it's quite striking because on Sunday nights at our student mass at 9 p.m., the church is really rather full. And even though Loyola Chicago is 72% female, there are more young men at Mass than young women, which is really quite striking. That was not at all my experience when I was a student. That has not been my experience at pretty much every parish I've ever been to. But I've heard similar stories at other campuses. And again, each person has his own journey, but I do see how there is an attraction to some sort of tradition, especially when people have been immersed in what has been called liquid modernity, when so much has been unstable.
I see that you're also nodding, Emily. Did you want to add in there? I saw you writing some notes.
I think the particular thing about tradition is really huge, and that is something that I'm glad feels relevant in both backgrounds, because I think in a similar way, that's what I was saying, is that there's not one right or wrong way to do things. That I think that like tradition and culture and kind of passed down memories and stories are a huge thing of what brings students to all aspects of religious and spiritual life. So yeah, I'm glad that it is that it's like, I can't think of the word, like communal.
There's something that we also talked about before we started here, and that was the importance of service on campuses. I'll start with you, Emily, and then Father Rossman, if you want to chime in. It seems that service is not necessarily mutually exclusive to practicing a religion, but it seems that there's more maybe commonality or common ground with service across various groups of students.
Yeah, and I think a big part of Judaism is Jewish values and doing mitzvot. So it's really in doing good deeds and in repairing the world. So it's definitely something that is very important to a lot of the students that I work with. So I think it's really a valuable asset for us to have and for students to be able to do, because especially in a world that is very polarizing and politically motivated and really intense, regardless of all of that, to be able to come together again that are under very specific Jewish values and or other spiritual values with other. I know at Loyola we do a lot of interfaith stuff, but it's a really powerful way to be able to do good in and honor the values of our people and really do good in the world when there's just so many bad things that happen. So that's a really special opportunity that students really enjoy
Father
partaking
Rossman,
in.
talk to us about service on Loyola's campus, and I'm just curious, what type of service would get the greatest attendance?
Yeah, so there are a few things that immediately come to mind. Some would be regular commitments that a student may engage with for an entire semester or an entire year. Some would be kind of a regular opportunity where people can just kind of jump in during a particular week. And then some would be one-off events. So, for example, for those semester-long commitments, people do various things. There's a soup kitchen in the neighborhood where a group of students goes every week. Some are connected to, tutoring at a school or help at a hospital. We have a homeless outreach called Labra that happens every week down at our Water Tower campus. And that's been really inspiring to see. Some people go there every single week, some just occasionally. But it's an outlet both for maybe those students I regularly see in church, but also students perhaps I never see at church, but they're engaged in the community in a significant way. Just yesterday, we had this huge canned food drive where tons of students went out into the community collecting food. This was the 20th year they've had this this tradition, but perhaps in this year in particular, there's a great need. And again, what is encouraging to me is that it's not as if you can box a particular student in, because some student may really love Eucharistic adoration, which we have on Monday nights, for example, but that same student may be very engaged in service as well. It's not as if it's just kind of a, church or service. The boundaries are very fuzzy and overlapping.
And if I could really quickly add, that was something I had also very particularly noted about kind of how it kind of blurs into, something that might start as I'm doing this because I should, or because it's a good deed, or because it's a mitzvah, or because it's service, and then it kind of transforms into just a habit or an instinct, which is really cool to see, and how the students grow from it. And first it might be a requirement. I remember when I was in school, we had our for my sorority, we had our community service requirements, and then it just becomes something that naturally is a part of it. So one thing that we do is, a lot of times if we have leftovers from Shabbat or from a program, we'll box it up and try to figure out if we can take it somewhere. There is a community program called the Love Fridge, so we'll drop stuff off, and that kind of used to be a whole separate thing of, we should do this, and kind of planning for it. And now it's kind of just a habit of if there's extra food, that's what happens, and finding ways. So what are actually some extra things that we can do to continue to contribute, that it no longer is an obligation, it's just a practice, which is really cool.
Father Rossman, I have a couple things for you. The first is, do you feel like service might lead to checking out Catholicism? And what I'm leading to is something we talked about earlier, which is you talked about having spiritually curious students who come to you wanting to learn more about Catholicism.
Yes, I think service can be an avenue, an entry point for people to explore religious practice. Certainly, at least some people would have a very negative view of religion. Though there are, I would say, important generational differences. I could talk about that later. But if someone who is not religious, works alongside someone who is religious, and they recognize that, they both have a desire to help other people, that can be a way in, a way to say that, perhaps I previously dismissed religious folks, but maybe we actually have something in common. And I'd say that is one kind of potential avenue for religious exploration. But then I'd say that there are other potential avenues as well. And I've had so many conversations just this week with people who are spiritually curious. Actually, we checked in, I forget what day it was this week, but then soon after, I got an inquiry from a student who does not go to church and identifies as an agnostic, but he asked to have his dorm room blessed. Okay, so I did this on Friday, and then just yesterday, I got this grateful message from the student. And again, he's using this language, by the way, as I said, I'm an agnostic, but I'm actually really interested in religion. And is there, a website where I can learn more about the Jesuits and, things happening on campus? And so, it's not as if the student is necessarily going to be showing up to church every weekend, but there is something clearly going on in this young person's life, and I see this sort of thing regularly.
Go ahead. I'm going to circle back to what you said. Important generational differences.
Yes. So I would say I'm I'm a millennial, and I also come from, I have older siblings, and my parents were older when they had me and so forth. So I would have at least some experiences more similar to perhaps Gen X. And, going to church was a non-negotiable for my family. Every single weekend, I kind of had that regular practice. Additionally, too, when something like the clergy sex abuse scandal came to light, for those of us who previously had a firm identification with the Catholic Church and a religious practice, it was just a terrible thing, to sit with and to look at. When I look at the students I teach and minister to now, they were all born after that scandal came to light. And of course, they would think of that as a horrendous thing, but it just does not register for them in the same way that it registers for an older generation. There wasn't that sense of being hurt because their entire lives, they've known at least on some level that this was part of the history. So I would say that there are differences. Additionally, on that first day of class with my students, I gave, I thought, a very simple quiz, like a pre-test, just to test their religious literacy. And it was illuminating. It was really quite something to see just how little many of them knew. And again, many of these students, they're not necessarily these hardened atheists who are so against religion. Many of them have not had really any exposure.
I don't want to sort of belittle anyone listening, however, or watching. I am curious, what were these questions?
So, okay. In general, they were very easy. Granted, I threw one question in there about the hypostatic union. That was not the typical question. I just wanted to see if someone really knew his or her stuff. But these were questions like, who was the mother of Jesus? What is the first book of the Bible? And the average score was 6 out of 20.
I'm taking it was not multiple choice.
It was not. Yeah.
Go ahead, Emily, you wanted to add.
And just like one thing, but kind of a little bit before the test thing, but that's really interesting. but the idea of people connecting more spiritually and kind of doing things on their own terms but not an obligation, we go to church on Sundays because that's what we're supposed to do. And I feel like that is really something that is a big generational difference, and is something not even just related to spirituality and religion, but is a really common trend with Gen Z in general, even like in the workplace and socially, they are so values-based and will not do something because I said so. They question things. They want to know why they do stuff, and they want to know what they're getting out of it. It's very a big trend in Gen Z is also, what are they going to get out of it? How is it beneficial? So again, really interesting to see those trends really clearly also reflected in the spiritual realm of things, because, and also the same note where you mentioned about a student who wanted their room blessed, I feel like that's very similar. There are so many students who it is so important to them to have a mezuzah on their door, even if they don't consider themselves, even myself, if you don't consider yourself super observant or practicing, that they want a mezuzah on their door because of what it symbolizes of having a safe and blessed home. And it is very Gen Z, and it makes sense.
Right. And there's also an element I see of an attraction to that which they cannot necessarily get everywhere else. So there are many, particularly young Catholics, who really like, Gregorian chant in Latin and incense and a more traditional liturgy. Or some of the things that are kind of weird about Catholicism are actually really attractive. Things like relics and, stories of, martyrs and so forth. Or something, tangible, like having holy water sprayed around your dorm room.
I was going to say, are the holy water fountains next? The little, coming to get the holy water from you for the dorm room, right?
Right. Well, the same student, he asked kind of what really is holy water, and I explained, and he's like, oh, so the church on campus, it too has holy water? I said, yes, and you can go in there, yes.
Emily, you said something interesting. You said, not necessarily practicing, Judaism. We talked a little bit before about the idea of, are you culturally Jewish or Catholic? Are you practicing Catholic or whatnot? What is your sense on college campuses? Is it more cultural? Is it more religious, or is both? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah, that's a really complicated and interesting question to ask, and I think, and the answer is there really isn't one answer, which can sometimes be the worst answer. But I think, especially with Judaism, the challenge is that it doesn't fit into a bucket. Judaism is a religion, a culture, is an ethnicity. The reality is it could be kind of everything. So it's hard to say. It's not necessarily one or the other. Are you religious or cultural? For me, as I kind of talked about earlier with family traditions about having interfaith holidays and getting to learn about all these different things, that to me was part of that was being religious, saying the prayers over the candles every night, and the once a year, sorry for admitting that, going to church on Christmas. That was part of, to me, that was what I considered both religious and cultural. And so I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think it's a very individual choice. Just for me, I am never someone who would consider myself religious. I don't keep kosher. I go to Shabbat services sometimes, but I don't keep Shabbat. But other people would look at me and think, well, you work for Hillel. You are so religious. So it really isn't one or the other. And especially with college students and helping them figure it out, sometimes the labels aren't useful. It's really just making the space for them to figure out what do they want to do and what's meaningful for them and what they want to identify as. So it can really be anything.
And I think part of what I'm hearing and kind of what you had said, Father, is that, Gen X, which certainly it was non-negotiable. You go to mass every week and that is the end of it, right? Whereas, as Emily is saying now, it's really finding out with this current generation, what is meaningful for me? What am I going to get out of it? And how do I make this work for me? As opposed to trying to fit into this box, it's no, how do I make this work for me?
Yes. And related to that and to what Emily was saying, I see more and more kind of a barbell reality where there would be a greater number of students I encounter who just really have no religious background. And some of my students in the class, I'm actually giving them an assignment whereby they have to go to a Catholic Mass or a Christian worship service and make observations and make connections with our course material. And some of the students have shared with me that they had never been to a church before other than for a funeral. While at the same time, again, sort of at the other end, some of the students on campus are so committed. There's a kind of a particular Catholic student group on campus. And so, Mass on Sunday nights. On Monday nights, they have adoration. On Tuesday nights, it's Bible study. On Wednesdays, there's a Taizé prayer service. On Thursday nights, there's another student Mass. On Fridays, they have kind of a community or social night. They have activities 6 evenings a week. Some of these students are extremely dedicated, and perhaps a smaller percentage would kind of be in the middle, where they're semi-cultural Catholics or Christians, semi-practicing themselves. I see more movements to kind of the different ends.
Switching gears a little bit for you, speaking about sort of religion on college campus, this came up, Emily and I discussed it. A friend of mine sent her daughter to college not long after, October 7th and 6th, 7th? 7th, I'm sorry. Suddenly had a brain fart. Wait, was that right? October 7th. And she said, well, I'm so proud of my daughter for wearing her Star of David necklace. I am concerned that it makes her a target. As a freshman going on this college campus, so many other things to navigate. And that was something you and I discussed, and you said you'd had similar experience with your mom.
Yeah. Who's sitting right here. Yeah. So because I remember when I was a Hillel intern when I was junior year of college, I started being a Hillel intern, and I had no fears, I had no worries. I was so excited, and immediately heard the response was, well, you're sitting at the front desk. You're the first person that someone sees when they enter, and that kind of scared me away from doing something that I was excited about. And I think it's a real challenge, especially for parents sending their kids off. And the reality is that the fear of how other people perceive us is the thing that exacerbates our own fear about doing that thing. And we can't control what other people are going to do and respond, and we just don't know what's going to come up. So we really focus on, especially when this is a really common thing that we work with students about, do they want to have a mezuzah on their door? Do they want to wear their Star of David necklace? Do they want to have a sticker on their computer that is related to something that alludes to Judaism or Israel? And really, like, what we do is, it's kind of like we compare it sometimes to a fire drill. You're preparing for that. You're prepared and you know how to deal with an incident or a heckler or something if it comes up, and you have that in your back pocket. And it's, we don't walk around every single day just thinking, okay, well, there could be a fire here right now, and if we had to leave, but we know that we're prepared for this thing should it happen, and we have the tools to deal with it. And that's really something that we work with a lot with our students, and especially from the angle of parents sending their kids off. I think it's really about having a conversation, understanding where they're coming from and what their goals are, what they want to express on campus, and as much as you can, don't let the parents' fear be the thing that's guiding them. But of course, I think if they have, no fear or no concern at all, it's good to have guidance and caution. But really, it's all about listening to the student and what they want, and encouraging them to be safe and be responsible and know what to do, but also represent themselves in a way that it feels useful and meaningful.
In your role as the Director of Student Engagement for Hillel for Metro Chicago, I know that you've had to respond to some incidents of anti-Semitism on college campuses. To the extent that you're comfortable sharing, discussing sort of what types of things you've responded to and how you've been able to assist.
Yeah, and I think it's challenging because it's hard because, when you're talking about Jewish life on campus, oftentimes it's really easy to just focus on the anti-Semitism. I think, but it's also so important to talk about all the good things. But the reality is it's an important thing to be aware of and talk about. And yeah, there has been, it's hard because there is such a range of things from, the most explicit, like at DePaul, there was a student who got punched in the face. There is some more physical experiences. Actually with my colleague who's here right now, we were tabling at UIC not far from here for an October 7th memorial, and an angry mob kind of swarmed us and tried to bully us out. So there's some that's a little bit more physical maybe, or there's some that's a lot of anti-Semitism might be implicit and people don't even know that they're doing it, and they're making really inappropriate comments to their classmates, and I just feel like so many students will walk away saying, and even in the moment they won't realize it, someone might say, if let's say they're like a media studies major, and someone mentions, it must be so great that you have so many connections in media, something that's kind of like a backhanded compliment, stuff like that. And it really ranges. And I think the biggest thing is that we, especially at least at our campuses, because Metro Chicago Hillel, we are a subsidiary of JUF, the Jewish United Fund, so we are very lucky to have an entire team of people who are solely dedicated to dealing with these incidents, and they have so many resources and so much support. And that's also something, even if your students don't end up at a school in Chicago, JUF is still a resource for anyone in or from Chicago. And they help us and help the students report it to the university and hold the university accountable, making sure there's follow through, and an actual investigation. And one of the situations was last year at Loyola, there was a swastika drawn in the Hillel room, because Hillel just has kind of a little lounge room, and it's card swipe access, so anyone can access it. Any student can access it. So anyone can go in at any time, and someone had drawn a swastika on one of the boards. And when this stuff happens, there is, at least so far in most of the experiences, we've had usually a pretty swift response from the university, and if not, we will really be on them to make sure it gets taken care of. So I think it's tough, because as much as we don't want to be able to have the resources to deal with all of this and know what to do, I feel really confident and thankful for all the resources that are out there. But it unfortunately is something that is still coming up. And then just one more thing to add on that, and not even also in terms of university and more formal complaints, it is such a common experience, even interpersonally. After October 7th, almost every student I know, also myself included, has lost friends, has been kicked out of a friend group, is not welcomed in their clubs, in their organizations. And that's also a huge, because sometimes there are not things that we can formally report. It's really about the support and helping the students navigate it. So also that side of things.
Emily, you mentioned Loyola, and Father Rossman, I'm not expecting you to speak for administration or anything like that. I'm just curious, after something like that happens, do you have students come to you? Is there some sort of spiritual outreach? What sort of happens on campus to address it for students spiritually?
Yeah, so a big...
Father Rossman.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, great. So I should say this, that I only arrived back at Loyola this summer. I was out of the country the last 4 years, but before that I had worked at different colleges and universities. I was traveling around giving talks and retreats and masses and so forth. So I have some familiarity with some different campuses. And I heard about this particular incident, and at least as it was described, to me, the university campus ministry took this very seriously. And what I was also encouraged by was that even kind of for our student formation of leaders and so forth, we kind of bring the different religious groups together, and there's just a natural and spontaneous interaction all the time. We were talking before about Emily's colleague Maya, who's the Jewish Life Associate for the campus of Loyola University. Her office is literally just right across from mine, and there are Jewish students who hang out in campus ministry, and my door is open, and so inevitably I interact with them on a regular basis. And so while not diminishing in any way the really sad and unfortunate incidents that have occurred, there is also a lot of life that is happening, in addition to those particular incidents that does, give you some encouragement.
And I think what I was getting at, Emily, really quickly, is that there is an open door policy.
Yes.
That the doors are open, that their lines of communication are open, across the hall, on campus, different faiths. And Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I remember after the incident happened and the support from all of the different faith groups at Loyola, and I think especially because there's such a great relationship and energy with all of campus ministry, but it makes everything feel a little less scary, because also you just know that people have your back, and it was really great, all the support that both the students and the staff got. But yeah, on the note of open door policy, it's a little difficult for our staff in particular. We are kind of scattered all over the place because we work with so many campuses. But I don't want to generalize, but I can speak for most campus Hillels or Jewish Life Centers that there is almost always a way to connect with someone. It's a pretty consistent open door policy, and even even though I don't have a specific office that I'm in all the time, my students know that they can text me, that they'll have the link to book a meeting on my calendar. Sometimes that is what I'll just open my email, and so they don't even ask, they just book time because they need something. And I think that it's so important, and in the specifically about the piece of kind of the pastoral care and support, we have an incredible team of rabbis that we work with. There is in total 5 on our staff, and same thing. It's just really incredible to see the immediate rush to support a student in need, and it is a huge pillar of our work.
Father, before I open up for questions, do you find that this generation does rally around in sort of these times of say, I don't want to say crisis necessarily. It depends. I don't want to minimize what any particular incident might be, but it seems that they're there for each other in a way that I don't know that previous generations might have been in terms of the, I would say, not only the emotional support, but sort of publicly supporting.
Yes. So it is quite interesting because, many have talked about how, people are lonelier today than perhaps in the past, or we may spend less time with each other in person than perhaps we did in a previous generation. But at the same time, I do see how, especially for a generation that has been immersed in that, there's such a hunger for other people, for relationships. And also, too, I'd say there's a much greater sensitivity around, issues related to mental health and so forth. And perhaps they may have a language that those of a previous generation did not always have. So that, too, can be an asset in relating to each other.
All right, with that, I'm going to open up to questions. Anyone have questions? Mia.
This is for Father. When you talked about your class at the beginning and the makeup, and it was interesting because you said agnostic, Christian, Catholic. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a percentage of Hindu, Muslim, Jewish. What does that kind of look like?
So at least in my class, especially this is a particularity of Loyola University, for that initial theology class, generally, the Hindus, Muslims, Jewish students, they would probably choose the other option of Intro to Religious Studies. So at least this semester, I don't have those students in my class. Though it's interesting because a colleague, she teaches a kind of a second-tier course. For their second theology class, they have many other options. But she teaches a course that is literally entitled Catholicism. And amazingly, it's not as if everyone in that class is Catholic. She has students of different religious backgrounds who are taking this just to learn.
Other questions? Anyone else?
I'll jump in. Oh.
I think this might be hard to answer, but it's for both of you. Can you just maybe comment on how the institutions of Catholicism and Judaism have evolved over the past couple decades in terms of interfaith interaction, and how has that affected your roles?
I can say, again, I think it's hard for me. I was lucky enough to grow up in a way that there's always, I didn't know until I was older that there was any, that, it wasn't all butterflies and rainbows, and that we all didn't hang out together all of the time. But I think, this isn't specifically Judaism and Catholicism, but at least with Jewish organizations on campus, in the past couple of years, since October 7th, there's definitely a huge shift of sometimes being a little left out of things, and a lot of the other religious student groups don't want to work with a Jewish organization because for various reasons. So it is, but out of all of those things, I think that the Jewish and in the different denominations of the Catholic groups, especially at Loyola, there is such a strong sense of support. And I know I was actually there last year. We had an interfaith Shabbat, and there are multiple interfaith events throughout the year. So I don't know if I can speak to the larger institutional pieces, but in terms of the campus relations, it, in my experience, has been pretty strong.
Yeah. So we actually just very recently celebrated the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, this landmark document during the Second Vatican Council, kind of the Catholic Church on on other religions, and it really was a breakthrough in terms of how we understand, people of different faith traditions, and in a particular way, our Jewish brothers and sisters, and at least. I think it takes time to totally internalize, a document. But I'd say for much of my experience, at least, there has been, a strong effort to, interact with people of other religious traditions and to do things together. I think it's important to have kind of high-level theological discourse, but it's also important to do things together. You talked earlier about service as a way that we can be shoulder to shoulder working for a common cause. And I'd say too that I notice perhaps some different generational experiences as well. I recently was part of kind of a training for staff at the university, and at least from my perspective, there was some reluctance to talk deeply about kind of who we are and the particularities of kind of the Catholic foundation of the university, with the recognition that there were people of lots of different religious traditions or no religious tradition present. Again, I noticed some different generational experiences. In my class, I very much try to greatly respect and recognize that not everyone, believes what I believe, but my general sense of the students I interact with is that they're okay if we are kind of proud about what we believe and that we talk about it with the full respect and recognition that not everyone is going to believe the same thing, but we don't always have to, water everything down. We can kind of bring our vibrant traditions together and still have communion of sorts.
My question is really a prelude of it is thank you. I think we've really had an eye-opening experience with you to hear something different than what we see in the media about what's happening religiously on college campuses. You are in dialogue. You work so well together, even though this is probably the first time you've ever met. Your organizations work so well together, and I think it gives us all, in the little time we have left, Father Rossman, in our previous conversation, you were talking about Catholic social justice and people demonstrating for or against there was a mass in Broadview outside the detention center. Can you just address that a little bit?
Yeah, so there have been a few events outside of the Broadview Detention Center, where migrants have been taken. There was now maybe about a month ago, there was a event where they had a Eucharistic procession. I think it was first a mass in a nearby parish, and then they had a Eucharistic procession to the detention center with the hope of bringing communion to people inside. They were not able to do so. And then on November 1st, for All Saints' Day, they had an outdoor mass just outside of the detention center, and that included one of the auxiliary bishops of the Archdiocese of Chicago, and like a busload of Loyola students went to that. Many different faith leaders and various people attended that. And so certainly I'd say that Catholic social teaching is a rich part of our tradition, and that too has been, I'd say, a positive, perhaps at times a surprise, that when people discover it, that okay, the church actually has, not only something to say, but there are people today who, try to commit themselves to those values, in our world. And I'd say that that is something that maybe not for all students, but certainly for a good number of students, that's something is something inspiring.
And do you feel like the current Pope has something to do with that?
Yeah, and it seems as if our Chicago Pope, very much is continuing that tradition. And even in the name itself, Pope Leo XIII was the one who really got the ball rolling with his encyclical at the end of the 1800s. And, it seems as if there was great intentionality in choosing the name Leo by this Pope, that he's very much rooted in that tradition.
Hebrew teachers are leaving, but don't feel like you have to leave right now. The teachers know that the kids can stay another 5 or 10 minutes. Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I do. I'm Emily's mom, Chris. This is the first time I've really heard Emily speak about her family school experience. And I just want to say something to everybody here. Emmy made a comment that she thought family school started at 9:40 because we used to come from Buffalo Grove. We pulled in the parking lot at 9:32 and then everybody ran. And it just felt like so much to get here. But listening to her today, I looked around at all of you and I thought, I have a son who would give you a completely different opinion of his family school experience. You don't know what these kids are going to take. And I just want to give all of you credit for being here, and so much credit to David and David was the beginning, but there are people who came after him who have supported this, because it's just like, it refreshed me to hear that everything we did really affected her in the way it did, and that you're all here and that your kids are going to have not the same experience, but their own experience because of it. And that's just, I was so touched listening to her, and I hope that all of you have that same experience someday, because we don't always get that validation. So if you don't get it someday there, I wanted to make sure I said it.
That's amazing. Just one other mention. If you have questions, speak now, forever hold your peace, and a plug that Father Rossman sang the 11 o'clock mass. So he literally has till 10:35 here. Any other questions?
Yeah. No.
With that, I want to quickly give them the last word. I would love just a quick little, what do you see for the future students on college campuses and what you see? Emily, I'll start with you.
I see a lot of great things. I think, especially now, this is my third year in this role at Metro Chicago Hillel, but I worked at Hillel at UMass Amherst for 3 years after I graduated college, so my 6th year with Hillel overall, and to see, and having experienced my own 4 years in Hillel when I was a student, to see the shift and the growth from kind of what we had talked about, from people being at a place because they feel like they should or because their parents told them to go, versus being somewhere where they can learn and grow. And I just think, especially seeing the relationships that come out of being involved, not only in Jewish life, but just in spiritual life, and the interfaith friendships that come out of it. And even now, I follow some of my students from UMass on Instagram I stopped working there 4 or 5 years ago, and seeing them all still be friends and go to each other's weddings and do all of these things. And it is really cool to know that I was a part of that. And it gives me a lot of hope to know that no, knock on wood, but that there's no lack of participate. I feel like there were some studies or some stuff about how Gen Z is moving away from religion and stuff like that. But I think every year there's new students and there's new initiatives and people and programs, and I just think it's gonna keep growing. Then not without challenges, but it's still going strong, and hopefully still will for a long time.
Father.
Yes. Actually, so it's interesting. I mean, there are all sorts of studies, and some, giving a different picture than others. But it is striking in that it seems as if, every generation is sort of less religious than the previous one. Until now, Gen Z seems to be, okay, there's not necessarily the widespread religious revival statistically that I would love to see. But actually, it seems as if they're not less religious than the millennials. It seems as if some of that has stopped. And then anecdotally, I see so many students, taking their faith seriously in a new way, or rediscovering, a religious tradition. Now, I wish perhaps that some of them had a little greater religious literacy, or, I wish that maybe they had the tradition that I had. And yet I also am blown away at kind of the fresh eyes that some of these young people have as they sort of embrace a religious practice or identity, maybe for the first time. And so it's certainly energizing for me. And it helps me see how my categories are not necessarily their categories, and that this is a dynamic religious environment.
Thank you both, Emily Kopka, Father Michael Rossman. We appreciate you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.